Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased joining me from the US, Walter Haydock. He's the founder of StackAware. Walter is an expert in what he does. So, we're going to talk a lot about cybersecurity, governance, risk, compliance. And this is a topic which, in my opinion, day after day is becoming more important. And the reason for that is, as everyone is aware, AI is everywhere. And recent days, we started to hear also about security flaws caused by AIs, attacks caused by artificial intelligence, and this is what will be the main discussion for us today: how to protect and how to be compliant. Without further ado, Walter, thank you very much for joining me. The way I love to do it with my guests is, I ask them traditional question, kind of an intro, like your background journey and what you're currently up to, and then we're gonna start our discussion right away. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Mehmet. Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. As far as background, so I'm the founder of StackAware, and we help AI-powered companies measure and manage cyber compliance and privacy risk to accelerate responsible AI deployment. And I spent the early part of my career in the US government. I was a Marine Corps officer. I served on Capitol Hill as an advisor to members of the House of Representatives. And then when I transitioned in the private sector, I worked at a range of software companies and understood kind of how business was done there. And I thought that I understood chaos and uncertainty from my time in government, but I saw a whole new level of that when I was in the private sector. So organizations spend a lot of time, money, and effort on security and governance practices that don't necessarily tackle the problems they're trying to solve. And I founded StackAware because I knew there was a better way to come up with a comprehensive approach to accelerating AI deployment while managing the risk.
Great. And thank you again, Walter, for being here with me today. I'm gonna directly deep dive in the state of what's happening around us, Walter. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the new, I think it's a new ISO, correct me if I'm wrong, like the ISO 42001, 42001. Um, and I started recently to see it more. Like people usually, when you tell them about ISOs in the cybersecurity space or the compliance 27001. So if we want to take the audience in kind of a journey of, what pushed to have, the standard now, and sorry if it's a little bit, loaded question. Um, what is it for? Like who should be worried about this new standard?
ISO 42001 is an international standard for building an AI management system. And an AI management system is a set of policies, procedures, practices that allow you to deploy artificial intelligence in a way that lets you manage the risks effectively, and is also focused closely on the effectiveness of your AI deployment. So there are requirements to track certain metrics, and organizations often evaluate speed of deployment, the AI expertise in their organization, their ability to replace manual tasks. So it is an all-in-one system for managing artificial intelligence deployments.
What was the urge, Walter, now that you started to see that companies need to implement or, have it as a standard now? Because from my humble experience, I've been in the tech industry, I would say, long enough to see people, they take these audits or they take these standards as just check marks and just, to be in the books. Um, but in reality, why really, there is an urge for people to take, these audits and these governance and risk assessment seriously, especially with what's happening around us in the world of AI and AI deployment?
It's definitely possible to have a paperwork-only ISO certification, and that's not something that I view as very valuable. It's definitely something that people do just to check the box. But the key usefulness of ISO 42001 is operationalizing how you manage artificial intelligence and the risk associated with it. So you alluded to the rapid growth of new AI tools, whether they're commercial or open source, and these are being deployed at a rate that's so fast that a haphazard or a piecemeal way of managing risk will not really serve you, and it'll open you up to a lot of risks. So what ISO 42001 lets you do is develop a repeatable risk management process when you are considering or actually deploying these new systems, models, and tools to ensure that any risk that you take on is by design and not by accident.
Let me quick follow-up question to you, Walter. Like, is it now becoming a must-have kind of certification for companies? Because if I might, or maybe I'm wrong, I hear want you to correct me. So in the world of SaaS, for example, and we know like they have to be SOC or SOC 2 compliant, and they need to have like some standards within this wave of new tools that you just mentioned. And everyone now, we are recording at the beginning of Feb, probably this will be aired by the end of Feb, even not if not more before. So OpenClaw, formerly known as CloudBot, and similar other tools also, but I'm mentioning it not as an affiliation, but more like it became very popular among people. So as a company, whether I offer AI services or maybe I'm a startup utilizing AI, how important, like today more than any time before, also to have these certifications, and to make sure that whatever I have deployed, whether it's for my own use or for my customers, is up to the standards.
There are three main types of companies that would benefit from ISO
Hmm.
42001 certification. So the first one would be AI powered startups. And oftentimes these organizations only have the bandwidth to pursue a single certification or attestation. And if the core of your value proposition is artificial intelligence, using ISO 42001 as that standard makes sense because it covers security and privacy, but it also covers a lot of other things like AI effectiveness. It covers the impacts to society and to individuals. So I think that's one area where ISO 42001 would be appropriate. A second place where ISO 42001 is appropriate is for companies that are training on customer data. We've seen a series of controversies related to companies like Zoom, like Slack, like DocuSign that disclosed in a non-transparent way, in a somewhat muddled way, that they were using customer data for training. And there was a backlash in each of those cases. Now, whether it's justified or not is a different story. And I don't want to lump all of those companies together, but the key issue is that people did not fully understand how their data was being used, and they did not have effective assurance that it was being used in a responsible and privacy preserving manner. So having an external audit regarding your AI practices can help build that confidence with customers. The third type of company that would benefit from ISO 42001 certification is a heavily regulated one, specifically in healthcare or financial services. At least in the United States, interestingly enough, there's already a law on the book in Colorado that specifically calls out ISO 42001 compliance as giving you safe harbor under certain circumstances if there's some sort of regulatory action against your company. So in healthcare, there are a lot of concerns about data privacy and how AI is being used. And then same thing with financial services, because people view financial information as being quite sensitive. So being able to demonstrate that you have a sound, grounded program for managing AI risk would be a big benefit for heavily regulated companies.
I'm happy you brought these example industries. Healthcare is one of them. um when you talk to leaders in whether healthcare or any like highly regulated like finance also as well, do you see like, do you spot, I would say, some challenges for them to also like understand what governance is? I mean, in the AI space, of course, what is really it is about. Do you think that they really understand, how critical this is, regardless of just, having an audit for the sake of doing the edit? I'm wondering what's top of mind for these executives, especially in these highly regulated industries. Mentioning here again healthcare and finance, because we know like how sensitive data they deal with, like how the amount also of data and private data they need to protect. So, what's keeping leaders at night when it comes, to the AI today and its governance?
In heavily regulated spaces like healthcare and financial services, we're already seeing a new wave of regulation that are specifically calling out those use cases for special scrutiny and for additional safeguards. So in the United States, states like Texas and Utah have specifically regulated the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. Colorado, I mentioned, has their own AI Act, which covers healthcare. It also covers financial services, insurance, employment, things like that. In the European Union, the EU AI Act is very broad in its coverage of use cases. It includes certain types of healthcare and financial services scenarios. And then all across the world, we're seeing regulators come up with a slew of new laws to manage the rollout and the use of artificial intelligence in those highly sensitive cases. ISO 42001 gives you a system for integrating all of these different requirements across a broad set of jurisdictions, customer bases, cultural considerations, and it gives you a machine that lets you build an actionable compliance system to make sure that you're meeting all of your requirements. And that's what executives are really concerned about at the end of the day, is avoiding regulatory action, avoiding customer backlash, and having a certifiable AI management system is a great way to do that.
Great. Now, Walter, there's something that I bring up a lot with my guests here, especially when we discuss about regulations and being compliant. Um, some people think that a lot of regulation might cause kind of a slowdown when it comes to innovation, and they might say, "Yeah, we understand, but this might like delay our plans. Maybe, for example, to release a new feature, or maybe it will delay our plans to get this new model up and running in the hands of our customers or maybe our partners." So what's the balance that leaders can do here, where they still do what they have to do when it comes to all these regulations, and making sure that we're securing, protecting, governing our AI implementations without having this slowdown of innovation?
There's definitely a balance between effective regulation and innovation. And I'll use two examples to show where it's not being done well. One is in the United States.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar, the United States is a little different than most countries in that we have a federal system where we have states that can have their own laws. It's possible for the federal government to preempt the states in certain areas, specifically with respect to interstate commerce, which I think plays in heavily in the case of AI. But unfortunately, we don't have a federal artificial intelligence law that's nearly as comprehensive as what the individual states are passing. And the states are taking different approaches to AI. Colorado's taking a very heavy-handed approach, and I have had some criticism of their Artificial Intelligence Act. I think Texas has done a better job in having a clear set of things that are prohibited that basically anyone in the world would agree people shouldn't be doing with AI. But otherwise, they're allowing innovators to innovate. And what I'd like to see is in the United States, a comprehensive law to cover artificial intelligence that specifically calls out things that are not allowed, but anything else lets companies innovate responsibly. On the European Union side of things, they took a very heavy legislative approach and were quite insistent that they were not going to change course at all until the end of last year, when it became pretty clear that it was going to be difficult or impossible for most companies to meet the high risk use case restrictions that the EU AI Act put in place. And as of right now, those restrictions are coming into force in August of 2026. So a big problem there is that the harmonized standard, which would give companies essentially a playbook for how to operate and how to meet the requirements of the law, has not even been formally approved yet. And the EU, or the Joint Technical Committee commissioned by the EU, rejected ISO 42001 as a standard, as an acceptable harmonized standard. They had some reasons. I certainly understand why. But instead of taking something that already existed, maybe modifying it slightly, adding in some mandatory controls, they decided to essentially start fresh and come up with something completely new. And they've been way behind schedule in the rollout of this harmonized standard. And now they're going to need to either roll back the law or just let it come into force and have a lot of ambiguity and a lot of chaos in companies. So I think the United States and Europe are both doing it wrong in their own ways. And I'd love to see a clearer, lighter touch set of regulation to allow innovation to flourish while at the same time managing the unacceptable risks that I think everyone agrees are there.
Yeah, it's I think the discussions will keep continuing, and it's very interesting how different geographies um will adopt to this standardization. I know like how complex it is in the US, but I think like even if we take like the EU, at least they like to standardize on the level of the EU, the whole European Union member states. But when I think like I don't know, maybe Japan will come up with something. Here in the Middle East, probably United Arab Emirates, they will have something, because we've seen like these I would say divergence in regulations. So of course there will be like a basic uh, a base, let me call it this way, that they would take it as reference and then try to customize based on it, especially in areas where here like everyone is pushing very hard for innovation. And like the first thing that comes to mind when we try to think about, okay, how we can regulate something, people would push back, oh, like you're slowing us on innovation. I'm talking here about this region, this part of the world. I'm not sure like how this will affect other regions, but it's eye-opening topic, I would say, especially to see how this will converge later to some standard similar to what we have done with the ISO 27001, and like other standards, like at least we were all agreeing on. Now, if I want to look in practical terms on the threat models of the AI with you, Walter, and when I was doing my research, I've seen like you talk a lot about the supply chain risks within, the AI itself. So where is that exactly? Is it in the data that is used to train the LLM models? Is it the way of development? Um, where exactly, or let me ask you this way, where is the biggest risk within this AI supply chain? Like if we want to dissect it from training data all the way to deployment.
The single biggest risk to companies with respect to AI in their supply chain would be suppliers that are training on their data in a way that the customers are not aware of or didn't approve, because this could allow for the reproduction of sensitive information to parties who don't necessarily have a need to know. Now, that doesn't mean that all training on customer data is necessarily wrong, and it's key to be transparent about what you're doing. And frankly, there's no artificial intelligence unless you have training data. So having a firm no training on our data policy from a customer perspective basically says that you're going to not use AI, or you're not going to contribute to the improving effectiveness of AI. So what I would recommend is having a risk-based approach to what data you allow suppliers to train on. So in the case of physical machinery, the performance data of a piece of automotive equipment is not really that sensitive. So, how many revolutions per minute a wheel is making isn't something that is really going to cause any damage if it's trained on, and it'll make the product more effective. Now, when you get into healthcare data, there's still a risk if you are training on sensitive information. It's possible that you could reproduce patient data to parties that don't necessarily have a need to know, but there are safeguards you can take. For example, you can pseudonymize the data that is being trained on. That means, for example, instead of saying this is Walter Haydock's X-ray, you say this is person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's that person's X-ray. Or you can fully anonymize it by completely eliminating any link between the data subject and the result. So I give the example of X-rays because that is relatively easy to do, but you still need to be careful because maybe someone has a unique bone structure or a piece of metal in his or her body that allows you to identify that person uniquely. So you need to take that into consideration when you're talking about training on data and protecting the information from a confidentiality perspective.
What about what follows training the data, Walter? Like, I mean, APIs, and again, back to what I was discussing with you, these agents, and we've seen disasters. I'm not sure. Maybe some of them they are exaggerated, probably, but the risks are there, right? So, what other attack vectors I would say you're seeing related to AI, other than the things you just mentioned related to the data itself?
On the open source side, we're seeing an explosion in tools and projects that are quite powerful from a productivity perspective. An example would be OpenClaw, formerly known as Moltbot and ClawnBot. That is a very popular open source project that is completely free. However, with that project, there are many risks that come through your supply chain. For example, ClawnBot uses things called skills, which are downloadable plugins essentially that expand its capabilities. And a security researcher named Jameson O'Reilly, he did an experiment where he could see if he could inflate the popularity of a skill and have people download it. And he didn't actually do anything to their computers, but he determined that he was able to cause many people to execute arbitrary code on their machines while they thought they were using ClawnBot skills. And he published his findings and warned people about this risk. The problem is that he's not the only one doing these types of things. And he's probably one of the few people that's actually ethical in the way he's doing this type of work. There are malicious actors out there that are using, for example, ClawnBot skills to try to steal cryptocurrency, to perform data exfiltration. So organizations need to be careful when they are allowing these new AI agents to roll out. And some things I recommend are applying physical or virtual sandboxes. So maybe create a dedicated virtual machine or use a dedicated laptop to do your experimentation. Limit the type of data access that these types of agents have the ability to get. So that means don't let them pull confidential information right off the bat. Maybe use them for marketing or for generating images, things like that, until you're confident in what you're doing. And then third of all, apply traditional software supply chain security measures. So do software composition analysis to understand the dependencies of these things. Do code review for open source projects to understand exactly what these things are doing. And then also come up with a allowable list of components that you can bring into your environment.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna keep seeing these kind of new threat vectors, popping up every few weeks, maybe even not days, I would say, because things are moving so fast. And this is where I would ask you, Walter, like, your main service is to help organization in making sure that they're following the standards. How much that is important for teams to rely on services like the one that you offer, because if I want to do something, internally or in-house, I imagine like maybe the team would just spend hours, if not days, learning about everything which is around. And this is where you need the third eye expert coming and having all the knowledge. Um, are we going to see this is also becoming not only for maybe the verticals we just discussed, something important for everyone? And this is where your services becomes, like, I would say, it's not like good to have, it's a must have services. How are you seeing this in the few months? I'm not saying in few years, because things are changing so fast.
I think by the end of the decade, every company will be more or less an AI company, just like every company today is more or less a cloud company. So, with that in mind, having an effective AI acceleration and risk management program is going to be table stakes. Now, some companies may want to build that in house if they have the resources to have a full time expert focused on it, if they have the ability to track the rapid changes in technological development. That is certainly an option, and some bigger enterprises are doing just that. At the same time, it definitely makes sense to have an expert come in who's a specialist focused on the area of AI risk management, because, like you alluded to, there are so many things out there to keep in mind that it's easy to miss items if you don't have a dedicated system for evaluating and managing that risk. So, if you want to make all the mistakes along the way and learn things the hard way, then you can certainly do it yourself. And StackAware's worked with companies who've tried to do it themselves at first, and then we've come in after the fact and help them accelerate things. Or you can go right to working with an expert and get that outcome from an accelerated timeline.
One point also which I'm expecting to pick up more. I'm not sure if if you are seeing it already, Walter, at least in the US. In the world of startups, and especially when probably they are about to get acquired, or maybe they're raising some funds. So there's the due diligence that used to happen and all this stuff. I have a feeling that having their infrastructure, their APIs, the way they train the data, so all the things that you just talked about during this episode today, I think this is you know gonna become part of the due diligence, where you have this report and audit, um, because it's another game where you have built on non-standardized security measures, especially when it comes to the AI. Have you started to see these kinds of conversation coming to you, Walter? Maybe from, I don't know, M&A teams, or probably maybe some investors who want to understand, is this startup following the best practices?
We're definitely seeing a lot of outreach related to investor due diligence at StackAware. That's because companies where AI is central to their value proposition need to be able to communicate externally to stakeholders like investors, boards, customers, that they are deploying AI in a responsible manner and also in a way that is globally recognized. And that's what ISO 42001 certification gets you. It's not a guarantee of anything, but it gives you the ability to communicate clearly to these external stakeholders like investors that you are following best practices and that you have a documented way that you're addressing the risks related to the core value proposition of your company.
um I'm seeing it coming, like, and I'm seeing it also as a differentiation. I would not say a moat, it's a big word, but I would say like a competitive advantage for companies. Like, it reminds me a lot, what's happening today with, as I said, when the SOC 2, the compliance for the SaaS companies became like, if you don't have it, like you might lose contracts. I know, like in the US, you have the FedRAMP, and you have, like these standards in government, and sometimes you need to have like advanced also audits if you want to deal with more sensitive places related to the government. So I'm expecting to see this more, whether you are a startup or maybe you are already a company. And as you said, like it's sooner or later you're gonna have AI systems deployed, whether inside your product or you're gonna rely on it to deliver your services. So there is no escape from that for sure. Um, Now, if we want to, I don't know, like I'm not big fan of asking these questions, but because things are changing really fast, would you be surprised to start to see like also some vectors that maybe we never thought about before because the AI is becoming so powerful that it can start to, create its own frameworks also to try to find weaknesses in the AI stack of other companies. Like, are we expecting to see this anytime soon, Walter?
We're definitely already seeing attackers use artificial intelligence to accelerate intrusions of target networks. So, primarily in vulnerability exploitation and attack path identification, that's where generative AI is incredibly helpful from the adversary perspective. So, it's going to be a race between defenders who are using artificial intelligence responsibly, securely to protect their networks against attackers who are using it to generate phishing emails, using it to find new weaknesses in software products, finding ways to navigate into the core of target networks. So it's going to be a battle between the two different sides to see who can move faster and more effectively in their pursuits.
Great. Now, if we have technical leaders listening to us or watching us, and they've got AI in production and they've never done anything before, like what do you think, other than contacting you, of course, but I mean, what's the first thing you think they should be doing now, like before even getting any expert to the house?
A key first step in managing your AI risk is doing an effective inventory of all the systems and models that you have in use. And this is easier said than done. Oftentimes, companies will track this in spreadsheets, which become outdated very quickly. So, having an automated and accurate way to track everything that's in use is really critical because that lets you do the next step, which is doing a risk assessment of all the systems that are in use. And after you do your inventory and your assessment, you may determine that some of the systems are not within your risk appetite for the company. So maybe they're training on sensitive data. Maybe the outputs are not reliable. Maybe you could be breaching some regulatory obligation if you're using a system in a certain way. So the risk assessment will help you find that out. Then once you're done with the risk assessment, you can go into control design. A key control would be having a policy on the use of artificial intelligence, but you could also apply technical controls like preventing prompt injection, avoiding data poisoning scenarios, and looking at the data provenance of the models that you're using.
Yeah, at least a start. This is what I wanted to hear from you, Walter. Like, as we are almost coming to an end, I gotta ask you something not related to the standards and all this, but like maybe a little bit about your journey and as someone who founded a company and you're doing this for quite some time now. Um, what kind of leadership mindset you need to have when you have these, I would call them hard discussions or hard conversations with your customers, and based on your background and like you work in national security, you have this long history also of working in prestigious places. um what can we learn from you here, Walter, about having these hard conversations and pointing out to leaders that, hey, you're doing something wrong here? What you can tell us about that?
The way that I interact with my customers is that of an advisor, and that's how I think that security and risk management folks should operate. So I try to, as clearly as possible, enumerate the risks and the potential impacts to the company as a result of what they're doing or what they're not doing. With that said, I think it's up to a cross-functional business leader to make the final decision about how to proceed. Because if you count long enough or you do enough assessments, everything is a risk. and you don't want to get paralyzed by your analysis. So something I learned from the Marine Corps is the importance of decision making. And sometimes not making a decision can be the riskiest thing of all. So I see a lot of indecision within a lot of companies about, are they going to go develop a risk management program? Are they going to deploy this AI tool? Are they going to try to pursue this opportunity? And it's it's easier to talk about it for a long time, and it's sometimes harder to actually do it. And I would say make sure that you're 70% certain that it's the right decision, and then document your rationale and then move forward. And by making decisions more rapidly, you will develop more information. You will find out what is true, what is not, and that will help you move faster than your competitors and potentially even adversaries like cyber criminals.
Yeah, and I think the 70% rule is proved like even by academic people who did the studies. Because if you wait till you have like all the information, you're gonna wait forever because you will never have like full information. Specifically when we are talking here about a technology that is changing fast, so yeah, otherwise we're gonna wait forever. Which is a great advice, also Walter here, and I liked also you know pointing out that there should be someone who takes like I would say ownership of this and take responsibility of all the liaison and like the communications and making sure that everyone on the same page. Who would that be usually, Water? Is it like the CISO? Is it like maybe chief AI officer? Because we are seeing these titles nowadays. Usually who you are seeing like the person taking these responsibilities or these duties.
I think there are two things here. So the risk owner for a system, AI or otherwise, should be the reward owner. So that means somebody who is a business leader who gets a bonus, who gets compensated if a certain product hits a revenue target. That person should be making the decisions with respect to risk. And if something goes wrong, then that person should feel the consequences of that risk materializing. But conversely, if that person hits the goals and does it in a secure and responsible manner, that person should reap the rewards. Those types of people are the ones who should be making the final risk decisions. With that said, there should be a full team that's supporting them from an advisory capacity when they're making those decisions. In organizations that I work with, about 80% of the leads for AI risk management are the chief information security officer or the security team. I've also seen privacy teams do it. I've seen legal teams do it. I've even seen data science teams do it as a kind of self-governing approach. And in some cases, I've even seen dedicated AI governance functions. So the key is having clear decision ownership, and that should be tied to the reward ownership, and then having a skilled and knowledgeable team of advisors to support that decision maker.
Right. And I think also it depends on the organization size and how they have that org chart drawn up. So 100%. Um Final and famous question, Walter, like how people can, get in touch and learn more.
The best way to find me is to look me up on LinkedIn, Walter Haydock, and follow me for AI governance, risk management, and security posts every day. And if you're interested in working with StackAware, then definitely send me a direct message. I am very responsive on that platform.
Great. I will make sure that I put the link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and also to the website of StackAware, sorry. Walter, really, I enjoyed the conversation. I think it's a very important topic, and I'm happy, like, I think it's not the first time we discussed it, but the first time we talked specifically about the new standard, the 42001, and um, I think we're gonna discuss it more and more in general about governance in AI, about security in AI, and why it's important for every business leader to protect their own estate, I would say, and at the same time protect their customers at the same time. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us today. And for sure, like people, as you said, they can reach out to learn more. And if they need any help, of course, they can get in touch with you. So, saying that, this is for the audience. This is how I end my episodes. If you just find us by luck. Thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, give me a favor, subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who are loyals, they come all the time, they keep listening, they keep pushing us on the Apple Podcast charts in different countries. You're doing great since last year, since 2025, continuing the same trend 2026. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the messages, all the comments, all your suggestions, also sometimes for topics and guests. And as I say, always stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.